want to talk a little bit about building a testing plan for juniors. This is one of the key milestones that we think is important for juniors and their parents to prioritize. Now, standardized testing continues to play a role in holistic admissions. This is a graph that we use with students to help visualize it. Academics at some schools like Georgia and Georgia Tech, Florida, is the first hurdle to get over. They've gone back to requiring test scores. The majority of schools remain test optional. So they're going to look at all the inputs for a student. But most of these schools, with the exception of the University of California system, which is test blind, most of these schools are going to factor a test score when it is submitted. So we always say to students, from an academic profile standpoint, a test score that is on par or stronger than your transcript will always position you strongly from an academic read. A student's resume plays a key role, particularly in the large public universities that are so focused on major. Essays obviously play a key role. Major at many of these schools plays a role, and at some of those schools, there's a connection between major and test scores. An indication of a student, in the case of STEM, a student's strength in math communicates, hey, I really am well suited to this major, and we could do an entire other webinar of the vagaries and complexities of demonstrated interest. Now, here's what we suggest for a game plan for families of juniors as they enter into the fall. In October, almost all the high schools in America host a PSAT at their school. Last year, sophomores took a PSAT. And while that's an important test, this year's PSAT for most students, they're prepared for the math level in that PSAT. And we say to students, once you've taken that PSAT, you have an indicator of how well you'll do on the SAT. By Thanksgiving, take a practice ACT. That way you can determine which is your best fit, which test best aligns with who you are academically. We then say to students, once your fall academic term has calmed down, start your test prep and really focus on practice tests. So parents on this Zoom whose kids are rowers or musicians or in Texas football players, those kids have an advantage because they know the value of practice. I joked with a cheerleader yesterday that I bet you don't step on the field and hope it goes well. You spent hours practicing that routine. You have muscle memory. You need to have the same muscle memory when you walk in to take your first standardized test. While a small percentage of students that we work with take their tests in the summer before junior year, this summer that is just wrapping up, more than 95% of the students that we work with take their first official standardized test just after the winter break. And they end up taking 2 or 3 tests on average. Some kids are one and done kids. Some kids find they need to dig in and take more, but that is the typical flow from October to winter. And then sort of a coming attractions. Many students spend August, September of their senior year deciding on whether or not to submit test scores or choose the test optional function at that school. And to finish off that coming attraction, this is a relatively simple exercise. All schools publish their bell curve of either the ACT or the SAT, and they call out the top 75th percentile, students that are in the top quartile of that school. By the time students enter fall of their senior year, they have a high test score, or if they happen to have schools in their list that super score, they have a test score, and they can sit down on their college list and say, based on where my school fits, where my score fits, that school's distribution and their testing policies submit, 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 go test optional, go test optional, go test optional. Again, we're encouraging all rising juniors to get in front of standardized testing by having a plan, working through the progression, and reducing your stress on this by knowing exactly when the student will take the test, what test is the best fit, and how they'll prep.